In this video, I'm going to be answering the question, is buying cruise stocks a good investment right now? We'll go through the cruise line finances, the outlook of the industry as a whole, the revenues, and also the risks. By the end of this video, you'll have all the relevant and up-to-date information about cruise lines, and you should have a much better understanding of whether or not you want to invest in cruise stocks at this moment. So we've all seen it now. The cruise line industry has been ravaged by this COVID-19 pandemic. Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian Cruise Lines have all been shut down by the CDC, meaning no cruises are allowed from US ports for 100 days. Now this timeline might be a little bit shorter if the pandemic goes away before that, but for right now, the CDC has said, guys, no cruises for 100 days. As a result, their ships are docked, workers have been let go, and they've taken on a lot of new debt in order to try and survive the next few months. Because of course, the revenues have dropped significantly, but cruise lines have huge fixed costs. Overall, it's just a pretty bad situation for cruises. So first, let's take a current look at their stock prices today. As of today, Carnival's stock price is at $11.85 per share. Now, if you rewind just a couple months back to January and February, you'll see that their stock price hit the 50s. This means their share price and also market valuation is down about 80%. Now, let's take a look at Royal Caribbean, RCL. Currently, their price per share is $34.01. If you look back at January, you can see that they actually hit $130 per share. So compared to January, the stock price right now is about 75% down. And finally, let's take a look at the third big cruise line, Norwegian. Their current stock price is at $11.35, and this is down from the high 50s in January. This is like an 80% decrease. So yeah, all these big cruise lines have seen a 75 to 80% reduction in their market valuation and their stock price in just a couple months. This has literally never happened in the cruise industry and pretty much any industry as a whole too. So now I think I'm just gonna do a quick analysis of Carnival because they are the biggest cruise line. If we take a look at CCL, we can see that their current price to earnings ratio is 4.35. This is based on their current market valuation. Right now, they are not paying a dividend because that was cut due to the huge decrease in revenue and their impending and possible bankruptcy. Like I mentioned before, CCL is down about 80% after having hit a high of $56.04 in the last 52 weeks. And their current price is actually not the lowest it's hit. It actually went all the way down to $7.80 at the very beginning of April. So since then, it's bounced back up just a little bit. So let's take a look at their balance sheet and see how much cash and short-term investments that they have. So right now we can see that they have about $518 million in cash. And if you add in their net receivables and inventory, we're just at about $2 billion in current assets. Obviously, a cruise line is going to have most of their assets not as current assets. They're going to be more long-term assets since cruise lines have things like ships and other property. Looking at their balance sheet, we can see that they have $43 billion in non-current assets. Now, let's also take a look at their liabilities. Now, this isn't very current information. This is actually back from November of 2019, but it still gives us a good picture of where their financials were before this whole pandemic thing happened. So we can see that they were at $9.1 billion in current liabilities and $12.7 billion in non-current liabilities. So yeah, the cruise industry as a whole, it's somewhat fairly over leveraged and they always have a ton of debt. That's kind of why it's an extremely risky business to have when revenues drop. Cruise lines really eat through a lot of cash fast if they don't have any revenue coming in. Now, if we take a look at Carnival's gross profit for the last 5 years, we can see that it's doing pretty well and growing on average. In 2015, they hit $6.3 billion in profit, and by last year, they were at almost $8 billion in gross profit. Cruising as an industry has been doing pretty well over the last 5-10 years, and we've seen a lot of good and steady growth throughout all the cruise lines. That's definitely something good to consider about cruises if you are thinking about investing in them. So recently, in order to survive during this pandemic and this huge loss of revenue, cruise lines have been tapping into their line of credits and taking on lots of new debt. For example, Carnival took on about $6 billion of loans in the last month, whereas Royal Caribbean has added about $2.2 billion in short-term loans that are due in 1 year. Take a look at this chart, which shows the current long-term debt that these three companies have taken. You can definitely see that their debt has gone up significantly in the last few months. So taking on debt is not necessarily bad, but it is bad if you don't have the revenue to pay it off. Of course, we are expecting revenues to be hit quite hard for at least the next few months, pretty much zero for many of the boats which have been docked, and we should even expect to see slowed growth for the next few years. Another problem is that even though there is less demand, the supply of ships is growing. This is because cruises have already committed to spending billions and billions of dollars on new ships this year. For example, Carnival has $14.5 billion in new ship commitments. Royal Caribbean has $13.9 billion in new ship commitments, and Norwegian has $8.3 billion. So yeah, the supply of ships is going up, but the demand's going down. It's just not a good fit. And then now, what other factors should we consider? Well guys, look at the current price. Do you think that this price has already priced in the average future outlook for most investors? Say for example, the average person who invests in stocks thinks that cruise lines will have lower revenue for the next X months, and they think there's an X% possibility of bankruptcy. If your own outlook on the cruise industry is better than that, that means now is a good time for you to buy stocks. That means that the current price is lower than you think it should be, and that there is lots of room for the price to grow in the future. Let's also consider some other things that have been in the news. For example, cruise demand. Even if the US economy gets back to normal, what are the chances that consumer discretionary spending returns to its original levels, especially when they spend money on cruises? So we do know that if the cruise lines survive, they will continue sailing. The question is, how is the demand going to be when they are sailing? Are they going to have customers, or are the ships going to be very empty? And also, what if there is a second outbreak or a third outbreak? That would definitely affect the cruise industry too. So right now, I think that the cruises are actually doing pretty well and their outlook is quite good. I have read reports that cruise lines are actually starting to book up for 2021. This means that people are actually starting to book vacations on cruise lines even in the midst of this pandemic. I think people generally have a pretty short-term memory about this type of stuff. So when the numbers fall back to near zero and when the pandemic is over, I think many people aren't going to hesitate when they book cruises. Now, I'm talking more about the diehard cruisers, the people that have been cruising their whole lives. I do think that this event will affect people that aren't big cruisers because they'll be more cautious. But I think the stock prices right now are very low for the future revenues that are expected. So yeah, I personally think that cruise lines will recover. It might take a year or two for them to get back to a pretty solid revenue, but I think cruising as an industry is not going anywhere. Once the US economy is back to normal and COVID-19 is contained and there's a vaccine, I do think people are going to be more cautious in general. There's been a lot of bad press regarding cruise lines because, as you've seen, there have been some pretty bad outbreaks on cruise ships, and also cruise ships that weren't allowed to even dock at a port because no countries wanted to deal with them. I do think it will be a little bit slower to recover than airlines, but in the end, they will recover. And in fact, I even know people that are booking cruises for the end of this year or even next year. It just shows that cruising is a special type of vacation and the diehard cruisers are going to keep cruising. So overall, I do think that right now is a little bit risky to buy cruise stocks. However, I personally will be buying cruise stocks and just averaging down if the prices continue to go down. I think that if you already hold cruise stocks, it's smart to just hold on to them, especially if you have a positive outlook on the future of the cruising industry. If you think that these companies won't survive this or that the cruising industry is dead, then now might be a good time to cut your losses and just sell your stocks. Buy if you understand the risks, because there are a lot of risks. But yeah, most people right now are running away from cruise stocks, so that always leaves some opportunity for people to buy low, and there is a lot of potential for a big return on investment. Just know that if the cruises file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, then you will lose most or all of your money. I personally am a fan of the cruising industry, and I think that their growth over the last 5, 10, 15 years shows that they are a reliable industry. I think it can be a good buy if you hold on for a long time. But if you want something that is going to make money in maybe 1 or 2 years, I think there are other stocks that could be a better buy. Anyways, these are just my thoughts about cruise line stocks. I will be investing in them personally, but before you buy, make sure to do your own due diligence. Make sure to do your own research to see if you think the cruising industry will survive this. These are just my thoughts, so take them as opinion, not fact. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to hit that like button and then also subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos just like this. That's it for today. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.